The year was 1864, and the land known as British North America was a patchwork of disparate colonies: New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and the province of Canada. Vast forests, untamed wilderness, and towering mountains stretched across the territory. But the real challenge was not the geography, it was the fragmented political landscape. Each colony was self-governed, with little reason to communicate or cooperate with one another. There was no sense of unity, no common purpose. In the province of Canada, the government was in constant deadlock between French-speaking Quebecers in the east and English-speaking Ontarians in the west. Politicians argued bitterly over language rights, trade, and power. Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, more isolated and reliant on their seafaring industries, had their own problems, with both provinces fearing economic collapse without stronger infrastructure and trade links. The colonies were also living in the shadow of the United States, which had just emerged from its bloody Civil War. American expansionism, already evident in the West, loomed large in the minds of many Canadian leaders. They feared that, without unification, the young and vulnerable British colonies would be annexed by their powerful southern neighbor. Into this uncertainty stepped a group of visionary leaders who sought to overcome the divisions and chart a new course. Leading them was John A. Macdonald, a brilliant and ambitious politician from Ontario, whose vision of a united country was unwavering. Alongside him stood George-Étienne Cartier, the proud defender of French Canadians, determined to protect the culture and language of Quebec. Charles Tupper of Nova Scotia and Samuel Tilley of New Brunswick would complete the circle, representing the maritime provinces. But the dream of a united Canada was far from reality. In September 1864, leaders from the maritime provinces gathered in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, to discuss the possibility of uniting Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island. The proposal had been on the table for some time, but it was seen by many as a distant and impractical idea. The maritime provinces were culturally and economically distinct, with strong ties to Britain and little incentive to merge. But the Charlottetown Conference would take a dramatic turn when the province of Canada's delegation, led by Macdonald, Cartier, and Tupper, arrived with a bold new vision, one that went beyond the Maritimes and included all of British North America in a grand confederation. The Canadian delegates were persuasive, laying out the potential benefits of unity, shared economic prosperity, a stronger defense against American aggression, and the chance to create a nation that spanned the continent. As the leaders debated late into the night, a sense of possibility began to emerge. Macdonald spoke passionately about building a country that could stand on its own, while Cartier reminded the French Canadians of the importance of safeguarding their rights in a larger union. Tupper, pragmatic and focused, argued that unity was the only way to secure the region's future. But for all their eloquence, the dream of confederation faced stiff opposition. Many feared the loss of local control, especially in Quebec, where cultural identity was a paramount concern. And there were personal rivalries among the politicians that threatened to derail the negotiations. Yet, the men at Charlottetown realized that they were standing on the edge of history. By the end of the conference, a consensus began to form. The idea of confederation was no longer a distant dream, but something within reach. Following the Charlottetown Conference, the momentum for confederation began to build. More conferences followed, in Quebec City and in London, as the delegates from the various colonies worked out the finer details of how this new country would be structured. The debates were fierce. What would the relationship between the provinces and the central government look like? How would power be shared between the French and English-speaking populations? What rights would the provinces have to govern themselves? These questions consumed the politicians for months, and at times it seemed as though the dream of confederation might collapse under the weight of its complexities. For John A. Macdonald, the stakes were personal as well as political. He had long believed in the idea of a united Canada, but his health was failing. He suffered from alcoholism and was plagued by personal tragedy, having lost his young son in 1869. These personal demons often threatened to derail his efforts, but Macdonald's vision for a united country kept him focused. In Quebec, George-Étienne Cartier fought to ensure that the French-speaking population would have equal rights and protections in the new Confederation. He knew that many in Quebec were skeptical, fearing that a united Canada would dilute their culture and diminish their influence. But Cartier saw Confederation as an opportunity to secure Quebec's place in a larger and stronger nation, and he worked tirelessly to convince his fellow French Canadians to embrace the vision. The negotiations culminated in the drafting of the British North America Act, a document that would lay out the framework for the new Dominion of Canada. It was a masterpiece of compromise, carefully balancing the needs of the provinces with the powers of the central government. The act also guaranteed that French and English would both be official languages of the new country, a crucial victory for Cartier and Quebec. Finally, after years of debate, negotiation, and personal struggle, the leaders achieved what had once seemed impossible. The morning of July 1st, 1867, dawned with a sense of anticipation. In cities and towns across the colonies, flags were raised and celebrations began. The Dominion of Canada had officially come into existence, bringing together 4 provinces, Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia, into a single nation under the British Crown. John A. Macdonald, now the first Prime Minister of Canada, stood on the steps of Parliament, looking out over the crowds that had gathered to mark the occasion. His mind was heavy with the knowledge of the work still to come. The fledgling nation was fragile, its future uncertain. But in that moment, as the crowds cheered and the flags waved, Macdonald felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. Against all odds, they had done it. They had created a nation. Yet, the work of nation building had only just begun. In the years that followed, Macdonald and his government faced immense challenges. The provinces were divided by vast distances, and the dream of a united country seemed fragile without a way to physically connect them. The solution would be the Canadian Pacific Railway, an ambitious project to build a transcontinental railroad that would link the eastern provinces to the western frontier. The railway project was fraught with difficulties, financial crises, labor strikes, and political scandals. But Macdonald saw it as essential to the survival of the young nation, and he fought fiercely to see it completed. When the last spike was driven in 1885, the railway became a powerful symbol of Canada's unity, binding the country together from coast to coast. However, the creation of Canada was not without its darker side. Indigenous peoples were largely excluded from the conversations that shaped the new nation, and as settlers moved westward, Indigenous communities faced increasing pressures on their land and way of life. Treaties were signed, often under unfair conditions, and the residential school system, aimed at assimilating Indigenous children, would leave a legacy of pain and injustice that continues to be felt today. Meanwhile, tensions between English and French Canadians remained, especially in Quebec, where many felt that their unique culture and language were under threat. The question of Quebec's place within Canada would resurface time and again in the years to come, sometimes in the form of fierce political debates, other times in the form of outright crisis. Through all the challenges, economic hardship, political divisions, and social unrest, Canada endured. It grew, with provinces like Manitoba, British Columbia, and Prince Edward Island joining Confederation, expanding the country from the Atlantic to the Pacific and eventually to the Arctic. The story of Confederation is one of perseverance, compromise, and vision, a dream that began in the hearts of a few and became the reality of millions. From the vast forests of Ontario to the rolling hills of Quebec, from the rugged shores of Nova Scotia to the windswept plains of Manitoba, the new Dominion of Canada would become a land of diversity, bound not by uniformity but by shared values and aspirations. As the 20th century dawned, Canada would step onto the world stage as a growing, confident nation, ready to face the challenges of the future, just as its founders had faced the challenges of the past. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more awesome stories and to help my channel grow.